Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's session on the ALN Airports Asset Leadership Board. This is the launch program for this new board. And before we get talking to Bryan Oldham and Jennifer Mims about this, we just want to thank our ALN patron member, Onuma System, and our platinum member, Onuma System, and our patron members, including Jacobs, ABS Quality Evaluations, CGI, and Definitive Logic. And we also want to thank all our organizational members because they really make programming like this possible, as well as our recent brainstorm around trees and tiny forests and more. So please reach out if you're interested in working with us. And we have a bunch of events upcoming, including a following program. Oh yeah, it looks like we have Bryan joining. Thanks for joining us, Bryan, and we'll get to you in just a moment. But before that, we want to just note that on November 9th, ALN Thursday at 3, we have a follow-up Airports Asset Leadership Board program featuring the CEO, Denver Philip A. Washington of Denver International Airport. And so please join us in 2 weeks for that program. And we will have a number of other speakers there as part of the panel discussion led by Jennifer Mims. And you notice we haven't found a photo of Michael Wood yet, but we will get that before 2 weeks' time. And with that, I will just say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. And with that, Mike Bordenero, Executive Director for the ALN, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. And how are things in Lander?
Good, snowy. Winter has hit, and it is snowy out my window now.
Oh, wow.
This photo is from Vegas and not recently, so.
I am from Chicago, and we're having a 70-degree day here. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us from
San Diego.
It's
Yes.
always 70 degrees. And Bryan, how are things in Denver?
They're cold. We're expecting our first snow this weekend.
Oh, wow.
So, of the many things about airport asset management that we'll get into eventually will be snow. But before we start talking about airports and airport asset management, what we'd like to do is start ALN Thursday at 3 with the question, how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey? And this question is particularly poignant for this board because I know a little bit of the background from both of you. But Bryan, why don't you go first, and then we'll ask Jennifer.
Sure. So from an asset management standpoint, I've been doing some sort of asset management for the last 20 plus years of my 30 plus year career. I've done everything from software selections to strategic asset management plans to detailed asset management plans. I started out in the water industry and applying the fundamentals of asset management to there, the remaining useful lives, the risk scoring in the water industry. So think of water plants, sewer plants, all the pipelines that are associated with distributing and collecting water and waste. And I'm very new to the airport industry. I actually have traveled over 1,000,000 miles in my career, but I just joined the airport in June. I'm very excited because there's so many wonderful opportunities for asset management, especially here at DEN. And it's the same basic fundamentals wherever you go. You're still doing asset management 101. There's a few different challenges here than there are in the water industry or any other industry, but the fundamentals of asset management are identical. You're still doing your risk scoring. You're still calculating your remaining useful lives. You're still doing all of that key information. And it's just wonderful to be able to apply it and have senior management all the way up to our CEO, Phil Washington, really say this is a fundamental core for what we need to do going forward as we grow from our estimated 78 million passengers this year to 130 million passengers when we hit 50 years old.
Wow. That's great. So we'll get into more of that. I really love the transfer of principles from one industry to another. But This is a lead-in question because I know a little bit about the answer here. Jennifer, will you tell us about how you got where you're at? You're at Jacobs now, but you've got airport background.
Yes, I do. So thank you. It's great to be here. I've been on here before, so some of you may recognize my name. So I've been doing asset management, I'll say, for over 20 years, mostly at airports. So yeah, super thrilled to be connecting with Bryan because we both have the asset management expertise, and he's bringing water, which tends to be a little bit further along than airports in general. So I think we're really going to benefit from him. But I started off my airport career, like I said, many years ago at Seattle Tacoma International. And at the time, when I got pulled in, this is my entry to asset management, they had implemented Maximo. That was their EAMS system of choice. But like many EAMS implementations, they focused on the technology and not the organization. So I got pulled in probably a year or so after implementation, and they needed some help and support bringing the organization in alignment with like the bigger goals and what they were trying to do with this system. So I got pulled in then. It was a maintenance organization that was trying to use a new system where they hadn't really thought about processes and data structure and leadership buy-in and those things. So that was sort of my entryway in, and I've been working in at the asset management space ever since. My work at SeaTac was great. It was probably a similar role that Bryan's playing now at Denver. So it's going to be fun to watch Bryan's journey in the airport industry. I know it well. And then I've been with Jacobs for the last 9 years, where I've worked with lots of different airports. And the challenges are pretty similar across all airports. And so I'm really thrilled about this particular board because I think there's such an opportunity for leadership, crossover, and best practices. So that's a little bit about my background.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about the board. What do you see as the service that we can provide to the industry? Why did you want to get the board started? Jennifer, let's start with you on this one.
Okay. So like I said, since I've been with Jacobs, I've had the opportunity to work with lots of airports in this space. And 100% of the time, airports always want to know what other airports are doing. Sometimes it's like very detailed, like, how are they tracking total cost of ownership, or, it's real technical, but there's always an interest in what other airports are doing, or can you connect me with this airport or that airport? And there's lots of forms that get into like the nuts and bolts of asset management. There's the IFMA Airport Council, there's the Maximo User Group, there's the IEM, but this board is really on the leadership level. How does a leadership team set a tone for asset management and really like lead the organization to change their culture and their processes? And yeah, sometimes they're software, but it's the leadership that I think consistently from airport to airport often is the challenge, and sometimes even the gap. So I'm excited about this board, and I wanted to start it to create a forum for those leadership discussions, not necessarily nuts and bolts, because I think that's already covered by other forms that are out there. So really focused on the leadership piece.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Of course, that's our raison d'etre. So it's perfect. And Bryan, what did you see as the value of your involvement in this board?
Well, I saw my value as being able to bring some real world expertise and knowledge, very much like Jennifer has, to the airport industry. I'm sure most airports are doing some form of asset management, but how do you continuously improve it and increase it and enhance it? And it starts with the leadership. So making sure the leadership understands what needs to go on, and then they can make sure that their people are doing it. So that gave me, I think, a great opportunity to really present, hey, here's some other things you may not have thought of that would be beneficial for your airport, and go from there.
Well, that's great. So one of the things that we've come to understand is the need for rapid deployment of best practices. The tools and processes work. They're proven. We can highlight those. There's success stories everywhere. And the real issue is getting the word out about these successes, these repeatable successes, to other organizations. And as Jennifer and Bryan both noted, it's the leadership that needs to set the direction. And all the airports are operating. There is on-time records go up and down at different airports, whatever, but it's functioning. It's not that there needs to be a change, but the tools and processes are constantly evolving. And how do you keep up with the latest and best practice? And so we're very happy to be able to provide a forum for those types of interests. And Bryan, you set the tone for what will be our panel discussion in 2 weeks' time, where we'll be involving people from Los Angeles Airport, Pittsburgh Airport, and the CEO from Denver in a discussion. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept of collaboration among leaders from multiple organizations?
Sure. So it's really important to understand that asset management is not an island. That everybody has a role in asset management, whether it's airline operations, whether it's your contracting people, whether it's your materials management or your maintenance people. There's a large role that everyone has a bit to play in. Asset management is all of those organizations are customers for asset management and what we do. And it's really important to make sure asset management knows that they need to serve their customers, but also let the customers know they also have an important role. Maintenance, for example, has to be able to fill in the right data into the work orders. So you're getting good data that you can start predicting with and making better decisions on. Finance needs to be involved. So as you're developing the remaining useful lives, you can start developing a better CIP plan so they understand what monies are going to be needed 1, 2, 10 years out, 20 years out. And so everybody has a role to play in it. It doesn't really matter that you can't just do it by yourself, and you can't have these groups doing it off on their own. Even to engineering and construction and design, they have a huge role where asset management needs to be involved up front. How do you make that happen? How do you break down those silos that may exist? Not everybody will have the silos, but from my experience, most companies do have silos. And how do you start breaking those silos down? And it can start with the asset management leadership, and then the asset management group can be the facilitator to breaking down those silos.
Love hearing that. We're so aligned. It's great to have you involved. And Jennifer, you had mentioned about culture. Now, the thing about airports is you've got leaders from a municipality or county. So you've got elected leaders. Then you've got the airport leaders. Then you've got the airline leaders. Then you've got the leaders of all the contract organizations. It's a big amalgam of leaders that you're having to manage. How is that done? Sorry, I just asked you how to solve the problem of the world in one question.
World peace. How do you solve world peace? Yeah. No, but you're right. I mean, there's so many different entities involved. And I think it's always key to have sort of that executive sponsor and leader. So at Denver, with Phil Washington setting the tone. So asset management's a thing right now, right? It's having a moment. You're not going to find any organization that says they don't do asset management or they don't want to do it, right? I think that the concept is now embraced. But the reality of starting to sort of move the dial on what I was just referring to as culture change is something different, right? But you do have to have that vision at the top, but then you need to have these sort of supporting roles throughout all of these organizations that do get into the nuts and bolts, right? So the nuts and bolts are important. They're an important piece, but you can only move that so far if you don't have that visionary leadership and get alignment at the top. So, what's really hard is, sometimes there's a leader that's saying asset management, asset management. You pull back that first layer of the onion and there's no supporting roles or processes or technology, right? So you get that. And then sometimes at organizations, you get like maintenance doing these things, but they can only get so far because they don't have a collaborative environment. So I think, working towards alignment of, you mentioned like FAA, airlines, airports, all these entities, the city, it's like having that leadership at the very top, but then having an organizational structure that starts to really align with what that vision is I think, what starts to really impact the culture. And culture change, we all know we're in it. We probably all have worked with organizations. That is a long game, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It's years and years and tens of years. So having an organization where that tone is set and continues to look for those improvement opportunities is really key. Asset management is about continuous improvement.
And just to add a little bit to that,
Please.
Mike,
Yeah, please.
And it goes right along with what Jennifer was saying. It's really asset management. Look at it as a philosophy, which has to be supported by the senior management. It's not the systems. It's not the Maximo that you have. It's not the Infor or whatever other system you may be using. Those, yes, they support asset management, but asset management's a holistic philosophy of how can we continuously improve, as Jennifer was saying, and then what do we need to do to support that? The structure, the organization, and then the systems as well.
That's the first time someone has said it's a philosophy. I really like that, Bryan. We're going to have to, well, we need bumper stickers or something. We'll work on that. So how have you seen the philosophy from water asset management differ from airport asset management?
So I think, as Jennifer mentioned, the water industry is a little bit ahead. They're usually behind on almost everything. So I was really surprised when I found out that they were actually ahead of airports on the asset management side. But it's what you're seeing in the water industry is what's happening in the airport industry as well. It's like you're having aging infrastructure. Things are starting to hit their end of life. And very similar, they don't have an endless supply of money. So they were saying, how can we do things better, more effectively, more efficiently? How can we extend the life of things instead of just being reactive? How can we really be proactive and start moving the needle to where we're extending life instead of a 20-year lifespan? Maybe we can get 25 years out of it. Saves us some capital. It lowers our interest rate, all of those other things. So that philosophy took hold in the water industry probably the leaders about 20 years ago, and everybody's now pretty much on board with it for the last decade. And so you're seeing that whole change in mindset, and they're starting to break down those silos, and that philosophy is really getting embedded. So now you're getting these groups that go in and it's talking with maintenance, and it's talking with the field people, and it's talking with the finance people, all sitting in the same room, working towards the same goal. I'm starting to see that now, at least here at Den. And so that's the big difference is water industry's been doing it for about 10 years, pretty fully. I see Den, they've had asset management, but they're really just starting to really encompass everybody in it now.
What are you seeing at other airports, Jennifer?
Well, I think even kind of going off of what Bryan's saying, like all airports are doing asset management. They really are, whether they recognize it and are calling it asset management or whether they have a department, they're doing components of asset management. So the philosophy is really like, how do you integrate all these various components and look towards that continual improvement? Really kind of optimizing how they're approaching asset management. So I see airports maybe struggling on the leadership piece, which gets back to why I'm super excited about these conversations. But where consistently airports are doing asset management really well, and they don't even call it asset management, is the runways. They have capital improvement plans. They know every single failure. When they're planning for renewal, they're, concrete or asphalt, they're looking at total cost of ownership. They're looking at the wear and tear. They are doing asset management on that pavement. And partly why they're doing it. Well, it's important. It's a safety issue, right? But it's also a customer service issue, and it's mandated. And I think that's one of maybe that some of the differences between water and even transportation and airports. There's no mandate that airports will do asset management outside of the runways, right? And they don't call it asset management. You will do the FAA hasn't mandated asset management, but they've mandated these certain things around the condition of the runway and ensuring there's replacement plan and that they're tracking every single failure and understanding what it is. So I see that airports are all doing asset management, relatively sophisticated. They don't recognize it or they don't acknowledge it as asset management. But many airports struggle with asset management on the facility, like the terminal concourses and land side. So there, it gets back to sort of those silos. Like you have part of an organization that's doing it really well, but they're not necessarily taking those same practices and methodologies and philosophies and applying them to the facilities that are either the concourse or on the land side.
So that's one of the things that the ALN Asset Leadership Board might be able to do. The transit industry, through MAP 21, moving ahead with progress, has a requirement for an asset management plan in order to receive funding for new buses or trains or things like that. And that has brought the transit industry into asset management, fully, because it's a requirement to receiving funds. And as a citizen, I think all federal funds that are distributed, there should be an asset management plan for how you're going to be using those funds. Absolutely. And just requiring that plan starts getting people into the mindset, starts establishing the culture.
Right.
So that's something that we can discuss. And what we want to do is open up the ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board to others, and with people to come in to have ideas of the different types of things we can do.
Yep, I think that's really well said.
You're all right. So then, Bryan, how long have you been there at Denver now?
June 5th.
So
4.5
all right.
almost 5 months.
All right. So you're past your 90 days. And what are you doing in order to help assist rounding out the culture of asset management at Denver International Airport?
So the first thing I did, because I was said one of the first things I need to do is actually build some relationships that were not in existence with asset management. And so I went around and met with all the senior VPs of all of the organizations and start saying, hey, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's how we can help you, here's what you need to help us with so we can work together to start breaking down those barriers. That was the very first thing I started doing in my first few weeks here. Then I started looking at all the different information that we have, because Denver's done a lot of asset management reports over the years, and they just weren't getting done. So I was looking like what really needs to be done, what has been done, and where do we really need to go. And I actually set up basically a revamped strategic plan to start moving us to all of those fundamental things. And then I've started a training program. I've started an asset management leadership group. So they all, which includes all of the groups that we support in one way or the other. So they will know what we're doing. They have some input into it. Like, hey, here's our consequence of failure factors. Help us, are these the right weights for them and things like that. So they feel like they have a role and they understand why we're doing it. So they start understanding this has to be a partnership with them. And so that's really the key, is breaking down those walls. And that's what I've been spending a lot of my time with, as well as setting up those fundamentals for the risk scoring and the RUL and the COF factors and all of those things. So I have my team doing that while I'm helping out the strategic part.
Excellent. That is a great repeatable process that we can promote through to other airports.
Exactly.
And, And now if we could talk a little bit about the panel that's coming up in 2 weeks. And Jennifer, well, Bryan, Phil Washington, if you could talk a little bit about him, and then Jennifer knows the other speakers.
Sure. So Phil is I think, a very big visionary, and he's one of the reasons why I'm here. Whenever you see a strategic plan that actually has asset management as one of the 4 pillars of the strategic plan, that was huge for me to come over here. Phil he's retired Army, and then he came to Denver and was running the regional transportation district, basically the train and bus system. Then he went out to LA and was doing the same thing out there. The mayor of Denver asked him to come back and run the airport whenever the previous CEO left. The previous CEO was very good at building, and she was an architect, so the aesthetics and things like that. But she didn't know a lot about the asset management, why we needed to maintain what we had. Phil, coming from the Army and what he was doing with RTD and with the Metro out in LA, understood the value and the need for asset management. Said, we've been ignoring this for too long. We need to make it happen. And so he's been the visionary that's been pushing it here, that's got everybody on board, that's goes to council, gets things rolling with council for us. So he's going to be a very strong leader for aviation. He's also on some national committees with President Biden that President Biden has established. So he's well known from not only airlines, but transportation as well. And he's also pushing with sustainability. We just won an award for one of the greenest airports in the country. And he's doing all those things that we need to do to really grow the airport, maintain the airport, which is where the asset management comes up, and build. And of course, everything we're building has to come in asset management. So we're going to have those things going in on day one instead of 20 years after the fact. So very strong visionary.
I would suspect he understands the long-term nature that Jennifer was mentioning. We had the Air Force present, and they said, we're 15 years into a 30-year asset management program. I mean, that's the mindset you have to really get this right. So
to me, asset management is continuous. It never ends. You're always wanting to continuously improve. You're always going to have assets ending at the end of their life. How do we replace them? When do we replace them? So it's going to be a continuous event that happens going forward as long as the airport's around.
And Jennifer, the other speakers?
Yeah, so one of the speakers that will be joining is Rick Connolly. He's the Deputy Executive Facilities Management Guru.
We've got it right here in the chat.
Okay. Oh,
Deputy
good.
Executive Director, Facility Management Division. You were spot on.
Okay, excellent. So Rick is from LAWA, which is Los Angeles World Airports. They oversee 2 airports, which is Van Nuys and then the very well-known LAX. So Rick's going to come in and talk about leadership. They've been on this journey for well over 10 years, and their story was similar. They implemented Maximo. It was chaos, and then they've now stabilized and really progressed. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Rick's story and the leadership that he brought to that team. And then we're also going to be joined by Michael Wood, who is from the Pittsburgh International Airport. Mike is an asset manager. He's only been doing this for a couple of years, but he has the sort of perfect mix of like knowing how to get things done and almost like the personality, the finesse to move things forward. And Pittsburgh has a couple asset management plans that they've developed and are starting to implement. And that sounds like something simple, but it's a big deal. Most airports don't have AMPs. So I think he'll talk a little bit about the leadership piece and then also a deeper dive on the AMPs there at Pittsburgh. So really looking forward to having both of those gentlemen join as well.
Yeah, well, we're very happy that both of you have agreed to be co-chairs of the ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board. I think this is off to a great start. You've both said things that we just love hearing, and we'll get some highlights made so that we can get this out on social media and start rapidly deploying some of these ideas. And we look forward to talking with you more in 2 weeks also. And then whatever we end up doing with going to Capitol Hill to ask for requirements for asset management plans or funding or white papers and in-person events, whatever else we end up doing with the board. So thank you for that. And Nick, if you want to come on and bring us home.
Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to our two co-chairs for talking with us today so passionately. Bryan, you really excited me with this description of the upcoming keynote from the Denver CEO. Really glad he is leading the charge, and we want to hear what he has to say. And a big thank you to our platinum member, Onuma, and our patron members, Jacob, CGI, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Definitive Logic, as well as all our organizational members. Thank you for making this possible. We love doing programs like this, sharing best practices, like Mike says, and rapidly deploying them, hopefully. And it's all about partnership and collaboration. So grateful to have partnered with these organizations so far. And if you want to partner with us, we would love to if you're out there watching. And just again, mentioning that in 2 weeks, we have another Airport Asset Leadership Board program featuring a keynote from Philip A. Washington, CEO of the Denver International Airport, and a panel discussion where you'll see Jennifer again. And I believe Bryan will be there as well, even though he's not featured. And then one more upcoming event reminder is there will be a ISO A55K professional certification course starting November 6th through the Andrew James Advisory Group. Mike and I are A55K certified, and we can attest it is useful information and a great way to get a more rigorous understanding of ISO 55000 if you haven't got that already.
55,001 and 2. I had read the documents and I love them. It was a little muddy in some places, but going through the course and using the examples and hearing people talk about their asset management experiences really brought everything together and reframed my whole understanding of asset management. And there are a few seats available. There are limited seatings, and this one really filled up. So
I was just going to say, I feel like we didn't mention it much in the discussion today, but I heard elements of ISO 55000 really woven throughout both Jennifer and Bryan's discussion of continuous improvement involving stakeholders. It was all there, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks everybody for attending. Sorry we're going a little bit over, but Nick brings up this really important point. And it's not that you're moving away from ISO 55,000. It's that there's, I think, increased focus on the results and the outcomes and not so much about the ticking the boxes. ISO 55001 can be seen as a to-do list, a really extensive to-do list. And it's more about understanding what those things are, understanding where you're at, and what next best steps you can take. Because this is a long journey, and every journey starts with a single step. And understanding those documents is a good first step, but then let's move on to implementation.
Well said. Yeah.
So thank you again, Jennifer and Bryan, and to all the attendees. Thank you, Nick. And we'll see you next week. And then please come back for November 9th, the airports discussion.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye for now.
Bye.